Sitting with all these other journalists.
Welcome. On behalf of the organizing committee, I'd like to welcome you to the 21st Annual Maine Sustainability and Water Conference. My name is David Hart. I'm the director of the Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions at the University of Maine. One of the best parts of my job is that when I get to help organize, host, and participate in this annual conference. Year after year, people come together here to reconnect, to learn from each other, to build new partnerships, and to search for ways to create a brighter environmental, social, and economic future in and beyond Maine. What started as a conference focused on water-related issues has expanded to include a wider range of sustainability topics, not just water, but forestry, agriculture, energy, and climate change. This morning there was even a wonderful session on trash, which I've heard the session organizers refer to as the sustainability problem hiding in plain sight. I want to thank all of you for taking the time from your busy schedules to be here today and for bringing so much great energy and wicked good ideas to this wonderful gathering. Speaking of wicked good ideas, we're especially interested in getting your feedback on the conference and your suggestions for improving it in the future. Please fill out the evaluation to let us know how things went and what you'd like to see next year. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I want to express my deep appreciation to everyone involved in organizing the conference, hosting sessions, giving talks, preparing posters, providing support. Special thanks to Ruth Paulsworth, Carol Hamill, and their colleagues in the Mitchell Center, all the volunteers here today, for everyone for their hard work, without which this event wouldn't be possible. So a special round of applause right now. What always happens when we do that is Ruth and Carol are so busy somewhere else that they never hear it, but I'm going to tell them that you did that. So, it's a particular pleasure to welcome a wonderful colleague and special friend, Carol Collier, to deliver the keynote address at the Maine Sustainability and Water Conference. Carol's been on the front lines of efforts to address sustainability challenges for more than 40 years, and you wouldn't know it by looking at her. She doesn't look any older than she was the day I met her probably 25 years ago. With an enduring focus on the sound management of water resources, Carol's been working tirelessly to bring the best scientific and technical information to bear on decision-making processes about the future of our water and our watersheds, all the while building collaborative capacity and searching for common ground. At the Mitchell Center, we've been spending a lot of time talking about bridging barriers and spanning boundaries between science and policy, between universities and communities, and between different ways of knowing in different academic disciplines. Carol comes to us with a degree in biology from Smith College and a master's in regional planning from an outstanding program at the University of Pennsylvania. She spent a career spanning these and other boundaries in her steadfast effort to build systems that protect the environment while protecting human well-being and building strong communities. In essence, making a difference. She's a regional, national, and global leader, serving as an outstanding role model for how we can all step up to the plate to help create this brighter future we're seeking. Let me just tell you very briefly about the wide range of leadership roles she's played. There's more information in the program about her. But early on, her leadership skills were recognized when Governor Tom Ridge in the state of Pennsylvania tapped her to direct the 21st Century Environmental Commission, after which she took on the helm as executive director of the Delaware River Basin Commission, something she'll be talking about today. She's past president of the American Water Resources Association, now a senior advisor for watershed management and policy at Drexel University's Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. She'll be talking about the key role she's playing in a $40 million effort to protect and restore aquatic ecosystems and communities throughout the Delaware River Basin. Although strictly speaking, Carol is from away, I'm happy to report that she and her husband Rick have been big fans of coastal Maine for many years. They are also avid sailors, and were busy last weekend preparing their boat for the sailing season in Chesapeake Bay, but I understand they're planning to spend more time sailing in Maine in the future, and we look forward to seeing them pull into Northeast Harbor in 2017. Please welcome me, and please join me in welcoming Carol to the podium.
Hey everyone, I am really pleased to be here. As David said, we love Maine, and so an invitation to come up here any time of year is wonderful, and a chance to talk about water and water management just makes me smile. So I hope we can both have some interesting information that I can provide, but also have a dialogue and talk about some of it. So most of my experience is with the Delaware River Basin Commission. So I will use the Delaware River as my example, but hopefully you'll see that there are lessons learned that can be used anywhere. So I am going to start a little bit about the basin, transboundary governance, how you share a resource, sort of what government does well, but what things really can be done better from bottom up, and some examples of those. So just for context, the Delaware is down in the mid-Atlantic region of the United States, fairly small as basins go, but pretty darn important. It provides water to over 15 million people, half of which live in the basin and half of which live in New York City and the surrounding area. It is the longest undammed river east of the Mississippi. I think the Yellowstone is the longest. So it's this incredible resource right in megalopolis of the mid-Atlantic. It's also a very used river, 8.7 billion gallons a day. Of course, some of that's thermoelectric that goes back into the river. So we provide water, half of New York City's drinking water, the first largest metropolitan area, and all of Philadelphia's drinking water, both from the Delaware and Maine tributary, the Schuylkill. What makes it interesting is that New York City gets its water from the very headwaters of the Delaware and exports it by a really incredible engineering feat of a gravitational pipelines down in New York City. But think about it, if your watershed, somebody came in and dammed up the headwaters to take the water elsewhere, right? We'll talk more about that. When you look at land cover, we are very lucky with the upper basin being about 80% forested. I know I'm talking to people in Maine, so that's not such a big deal, but down where we are, it is. But you can see how urban it gets as you come down toward the estuary. Up in that area, incredible recreation resource. This is the Delaware Water Gap. The DRDC, the commission, which I'll speak about more, actually put in place something called the Special Protection Waters Program. So where the water is really clean, what can you do to keep the clean water clean? And so this is a program, no measurable change to existing water quality, not standards. So trying to maintain that high quality of the headwaters. Really changes as you come down the river. As soon as you get in the tidal area, it is a major working river. When you combine Philadelphia, Camden, New Jersey, and Wilmington, Delaware, it is the largest freshwater port in the world. And so lots of tankers, petrochemical facilities, etc. But then when you get on down to the bay, largest contiguous wetlands of any estuary, and a real natural resource. So back in 1961, President Kennedy signed into law the Delaware Basin Compact, which formed the commission bringing together the governors of the 4 states, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, and a representative of the President of the U.S. First it was the Secretary of Interior, now it's a officer, a general in the Corps of Engineers. So my job for 15 years was to get 4 governors, and I know you know some of those governors, and a general of the Corps of Engineers, all walking on the same line. Yeah, right. We got some good stuff done, which I will tell you. But we're an area with local rule. I know you have that also. So when you think about rivers, rivers don't respect political boundaries. And we have municipal boundaries and state boundaries and 2 EPA regions and multiple legislative districts, which could be a good thing. But to organize this, you really need to bring the people together to manage on a watershed level. And that's what it's all about. You also have to look at the different components of water. You know, so often you go to the state DEP for a wastewater effluent permit or a wetlands permit. But we really need to start thinking about how all these things come together. Surface and groundwater in the same sentence. Wastewater, water supply, in-stream flow all in the same sentence. So how do we do that? Actually, DRBC has regulatory authority both for water withdrawals and for water allocation. But truthfully, I think the major role is to be a forum for adaptation and a place where people can come together to really see what needs to be done as the science changes, as the policy changes, as Mother Nature changes. So a couple of examples, sort of vignettes as we go through. This is a picture of those New York City reservoirs in the very end of the basin, 271 billion gallons of water. And if you can imagine, I don't know if there are any lawyers in the room, if you were a down basin state and this happened back in the 1930s, you would sue them, right? So it went to a Supreme Court case decided by Oliver Wendell Holmes in 31 and reopened in 54, which said that New York City, yes, you can take 800 million gallons a day. And if you were water people, that's a whole lot of water. Just for comparison, Philadelphia takes about 300 million gallons a day. And New Jersey can take some out of a canal, but you have to give enough water down the Delaware to support downstream uses. And that was set at a monitoring station where there has to be an average flow of 1,750 cubic feet per second. And also that would prevent any saltwater intrusion problems down in the estuary part. So everything sounded great in 1954. Then we had an extended drought in the 1960s. We were the driest place in the nation. And what happened was, if you don't send enough water down the river, the salt from the bay can work its way up, and Philadelphia's drinking water intake is in the tidal portion. So there's this whole yin and yang of what New York City needs and what the river needs, both for ecological needs and for human needs. So it got a little testy, and the mayor of New York turned off the tap to the Delaware. He knew where his voters were, and so it got very significant in the 60s. But instead of going back to the Supreme Court, they said, we're going to use this new thing we just created, DRBC, to be the place where we come together and figure out how to make this work. So here we are. How do you manage water when there's not enough to go around? And there definitely wasn't when we came to the drought. You know, do you go back to court, or do you look at equitable allocation? And what they did is they locked themselves in a room and came up with something called the good faith agreement, essentially equalizing the hurt. So when it got dry and the reservoir started to go down, New York City would take less, New Jersey would take less, the river got less, but the ultimate decider was keeping the salt out of Philadelphia. And to do that, additional reservoirs were built so that there was more supply. So even though there's no dams on the main stem, it's a very managed river. So we thought this was all solved. But something very interesting occurred, and Colin Apps is here from TNC. He was very involved with this and a major partner in making this all work. So, thank you. New York City releases the water down the Delaware from the bottom of their reservoirs. What kind of water do you get from the bottom of the reservoirs? Nice cold water, right? Water that trout likes. So it turned into a world-class trout fishery. People from Montana come and fish in the upper Delaware. And so the fishermen said, hey, you gotta manage this better for the fishery. And they came to the commission meetings in their waders and their rods and, were ready for action. So it is now a program that looks at not only what the water supply needs are, but what the fishery needs are, thanks to TNC. Then we had 3 major floods, 2004 to 2006. We hadn't had a major one in 50 years. We were a droughty river. And so that changed everything also because people, even if they lived in the floodplain, blamed the operation of the reservoirs, not necessarily where they lived. So there was a lot going on with that. So it all comes down to adaptive management. The Supreme Court set a line in the sand by their allocation, which was a good starting point. It was good to have. If you look at the issues down in Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, they can't even get to this point. So, there's issues with allocation. But since it didn't work in extreme conditions, you need to have a mechanism, a forum, to come together and sort of massage it so it will work under different conditions. And that's what happened with the parties and the good faith agreement. And luckily we live in the East, so we can do equitable allocation, not like Western water law. It still continues today. There's something called the Flexible Flow Management Plan. Right now it's on an annual basis. 4 states in New York City get together during the year, work on management, sign a new plan each May, and everything has to be done with a unanimous agreement, okay? So you know who has the aces there. So it's very different than a majority negotiation. So lessons learned for this: water does not respect political boundaries. You need to look at your downstream needs when you're looking at upstream management. You need a starting place. That line in the sand that the Supreme Court set really helped move the ball. And you need somebody as the forum and facilitator. Another lesson in management that I learned, so this is pretty cool. Striped bass caught in the center of Philadelphia, really, on the Schuylkill River, but you can't eat him because of PCBs. There's a major PCB contamination. Of course, they're not allowed anymore, but it's a bioaccumulative. It's a very complex compound with 209 different formations, different volatility, different toxicity. So it affects the top of the food chains: humans, osprey, eagles, etc. And their fish consumption advisories in the Delaware. So complex industrial history. You've got tidal systems, you've got hydrologic models, water quality models, 3 states, 3 estuary states, 2 EPA regions, coming from a lot of different places. It wasn't like the GE problem on the Hudson. Had it coming out of Philadelphia and Camden from their combined sewer systems, air deposition, stirring up from the sediments, old industrial sites, hazardous waste sites. So very complex. And we knew it was going to take at least 15 years to get down to a standard to eliminate all the fish consumption advisories. So in this, it took us at least 7 years, but it was based on building trust and really building a strong base of science. When I came into this started soon after I joined DRVC, and the staff had just done a study on PCBs and their sources. And it just happened that they did their sampling when somebody did an illegal discharge of PCBs in the Philadelphia system. So nobody liked this study. And we had one meeting and we were just swinging baseball bats at each other. And the dischargers and the agency. And I just threw the report on the ground. And my staff went, but the report was toxic. I mean, even though it was good data, it would not serve as the basis for science and get the group together. So we stepped back, we enlarged our toxic advisory committee, we huddled in a farmhouse during a snowstorm, putting together a strategy, what monitoring did everybody agree to, what modeling. We got an expert panel to help us with that, so it wasn't just the agency saying what to do, very important from the government side, and build a level playing field for the dischargers. So there's an adaptive management, continual improvement direction, no backsliding, peer pressure, looking at pollutant minimization plans for each of the industrial facilities, but EPA has a dangling sword that if they don't achieve what is expected for each permit cycle, they can put numeric standards, 5-year limits in their discharge. So none of the dischargers want that, so there's a lot of peer pressure there to make sure everybody's doing a good job. Pretty interesting project. So, lots of things knocking on our door, here and there. We have Marcellus Shale, underlying the top third of the basin. Not all of that is viable to drill, but we have a moratorium right now. But if you remember the map of the basin, that's where the forested area is. That's the headwaters of the basin, the most sensitive and most vulnerable. So that's a real issue to us. Population shifts, especially millennials are moving into the cities, but a lot of people are moving upstream. That changes water use, water demand. Energy production, you can't just look at the carbon footprint, you need to look at the water footprint, what different shifts in energy you're going to need. And again, with TNC's help, there's a whole study done on ecological flows. So if it does stop raining, we want the river to win. How much water needs to stay in the river for the ecological communities versus being with gas drilling or whatever. The issue with that is, if you're a water supplier, there's more water left in the river, you have a lower safe yield. And so how do we do this in a policy fashion? The science is done, we know what needs to be done, but the policy discussion is still in its infancy, where it's going. We also have the climate change issues, which I know is a big topic today. We are very vulnerable to sea level rise, and remember that issue with Philadelphia intakes? If you have a meter sea level rise, that salt water getting into the intakes will get there a lot faster than it did before. Where the heck are we going to get more fresh water coming down the river to push that down? So it could change our whole management scenario. More intense storms, summer droughts, working at extremes. So what I want to talk about in the last few minutes is, I work for government, now I work for nonprofit, I also work for private. There are things government does really well and are really necessary, but there are other things that can be done, I say better from the bottom up, and I want to talk about that difference. So just from how we've changed already, in the 70s when the environmental laws were put together, they were all in silos. Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. And then you divide the Clean Water Act. You've got somebody in a cubby doing wetlands permits and somebody else doing wastewater permits. It's very siloed. We're realizing that you can't do that, and you need to have integrated water resource management, pulling it all together. Translations. When I first started at Pennsylvania DEP, the permit writers were taught to read subparagraph G on page 6 was just as it was printed there, no ifs, ands, or buts. But the world doesn't work that way. And, I use an example of the Clean Air Act, which, the regulations are about this thick. If you're talking to the environmental department of IBM versus talking to an Asian dry cleaner, both of them need to meet the Clean Air Act, but really, really different in understanding and how you present it and what you're asking them to do so they understand why they have to do it. So a lot more education, not just hardball regulation. The issue of point sources versus non-point sources. Point sources have not been totally, completely cleaned up, but way easier than non-point sources, right? You can monitor them. You see what's there. You can keep a permitting system. Non-point sources, just as the name implies, it's water running over the land. How do you monitor it? How do you know a best management practice works? And then on top of that, these issues that we really haven't handled before. If you're familiar with the word stationarity, when all we do models, we say, well, we got 80 years of record, that has to be inclusive. So if we've had the drought of record in the 60s and we've had the flood of record in the 50s, well, that's what we need to model to for the future, right? No, doesn't look that way right now. So how do we deal with that? On the water quality side, things like emerging contaminants. We don't know the synergies. There's so many things we don't know, but here they are in the systems. We've got fish with tumors on them. How do we gain enough knowledge quickly enough to really manage these situations? So, need to look more holistically, look at multimedia issues, IWRM, as I said, integrated water resource management. One other thing the government does not do well, and at least in the Delaware Basin, most of our forests are privately held, not big commercial forests, but personal forests. And so how do we educate to have those owners protect those forests? Because government really can't go in and take them over. So that's a big issue. And then what I try to say to my staff is when we're doing a new regulation, we want to set the what, and we should use stakeholders' engagement to set the what. What goal do we want to get to? What water quality standard do we need to get rid of those fish consumption advisories? But we shouldn't dictate the how. I mean, my staff is really smart, but they don't know everything, and they don't have the right, all the different perspectives. Private sector has a perspective, academics have a perspective. So how do we gain those different approaches through talking with a lot more people than just the people that are on your staff? So, 2 examples I want to go through quickly where bottom-up counted. I had the incredible opportunity to go to the Paris climate change negotiations. And what I saw was real excitement, and from people who had been to the COPs before, said it was a really different feel. And in the past, if you remember, there was like the Kyoto Protocol and top-down targets, and you had to be willing to be able to meet those in order to sign the treaty. And if you remember, our president signed the treaty, but Congress wouldn't sign the treaty. So instead, they have been working with each individual country to do these INDCs, intended nationally determined contributions. So each country is deciding how much they can actually accomplish. And there was peer pressure there also, because I think it was Japan, didn't have the tightest plan, and they got a lot of peer pressure, and they actually made it more, more tight than when they came there to begin with. So here you have 195 countries signing on. It couldn't have been top down, or we couldn't have signed on, because it would have had to go through Congress, and I don't think that would have worked. So it's not the ultimate of what we need, for sure. We're going to have to do more, but it is gaining more developed nations involved, more money to developing nations than we ever saw in the past. So it's a good direction. Also, you think of it as a national thing. There was so much going on there at a sub-national level. Cities talking to cities. This whole analysis that Bloomberg is doing, Cities for Climate. Sessions run by TNC on the value of forest for multiple, both adaptation and mitigation. Private sector there, Bill Gates there. saying, you know, there's a whole way we can change the way we do business by looking at not just different energy sources, but how do we design cities? How do we design houses? How do we design communities to make them less energy intensive but still maintain our life standard, which is, of course, one of the issues. So, really neat stuff going on there. Last thing I want to talk about is what I'm working on right now, which is an initiative that's supported by a local family foundation in Philadelphia. And they have gone from accepting proposals for, a project here and a project there, to really saying, we want to really see a difference in the Delaware River. The mission is to develop watersheds that provide clean and sufficient water to support healthy ecosystems and human communities. And they are putting $40 million on the ground to make this happen. They insisted there was a strong scientific background, so it's scientific in how the sites were chosen, and also monitoring and assessment all the way through. It is not a top-down government initiative. There are 50 NGOs involved on the ground, choosing the sites, whether it be for restoration or protection. And then there's a continual evaluation process, which I can go into if we have questions. So in the site selection process, the Academy of Natural Sciences, where I am, was asked to look from the science side, where is water quality really good, and where do we want to make sure we can reduce forest fragmentation and actually buy forests or buy forest easements to maintain that clean water that we have. Then where are there areas that are impacted by agricultural runoff and suburban stormwater runoff? And then the last one, aquifer depletion, was more of a South Jersey special pine barrens issue. Then an organization called OSI, Open Space Institute, did a matrix overlay of the science that we did for the 412 watersheds, saying where's there enough capacity in the on-the-ground not-for-profits that can really pull this off? Where's the friction layer? Where's the development coming? So we want to jump on these sites quickly. And so it came up with what's called clusters, 8 clusters of watersheds. Some that need just protection, some that need restoration, some are hybrids, but across all 4 states. And as I say, $40 million being put in over 3 years for these on-the-ground projects. Monitoring and assessment of both the project sites and what we call integrative sites, to look at the watersheds as a whole. The Academy also received a $6 million grant to re-grant out to others to fill in research gaps that have been identified. David Hart is one of our senior peer reviewers for that. And really nicely, the William Penn Foundation board likes it. They realized 3 years was too short, so they've asked us to look into planning for a phase 2. And we're building new land use tools, runoff from land use, what to expect for stream impact at a stream reach scale, better mapping, 1 meter resolution versus 30 meter resolution, and then development forecasts so that we can really get the money on the ground in the best possible locations. A lot of monitoring going on, and what's exciting about it is all these NGOs were sort of fighting for funding before, and now they're working together, and after now 2 years, you can just tell the difference when they're in a room together. There's this really excited buzz where after the first year, it's still sort of not too sure about it. But they see the value for their own watersheds, but also being part of a larger whole is exciting, and they understand their role in doing something bigger. So to protect your watershed, it's only as good as the sum of its sub-watersheds, so you need to look at small watershed context and then build it out to a basin context. You really need to look holistically, both from the water side and the stakeholder side, upstream and downstream. Some solutions need to be basin-wide. The water allocation certainly can't be done from any one location. Some are, locally implemented, some government-led, some non-government-led. Got to pull it all together, and lessons learned. I think the biggest thing is building trust. I was telling a group yesterday that we had a group of about 15 representatives, each from a different country. They came in and talked to us. It was a U.S. State Department organized event. And there were countries on either side of the Jordan River, or upstream and downstream in the Middle East. And I thought my job was hard with 4 states, right? I'm like, whoa. But they, when we talked about it, it's trust that is really needed. And one of the things to build that is to have an agreement on the science you're using and make sure you have a base as you go along. Different problems need different approaches. I'm sure, as you all know in this room, with the projects you've worked on, watersheds are different, the populations are different, so you just can't cookie cutter one to the other. Government involvement is really important, but it's not the only answer. And I don't know about you, but this is one I sure found out. Everything ends up in the water, right? Point source, non-point source, groundwater leaching, air deposition. The medium that gets it the most, the medium, is water. So it's really worth protecting. And I think everybody in this room knows that. So that's all I have, and I'd love to take questions. Thank you.
So we have a couple people going around with microphones. Just raise your hand and they'll come to you. And you can
I'll stand back here.
well, just raise your hand.
Hello. I was wondering if you could give us an example of specific actions you took or choices made that helped develop that kind of trust you're talking about?
Excellent question. A couple of different things. I think engaging stakeholders early and not at the 11th hour. I was involved in some environmental justice issues when I was at Pennsylvania DEP. And one of the problems that I realized was that the community didn't know the process. You didn't know you had to write to get write a letter to get a public hearing or a public meeting. And so just working with a community that could be impacted early on, sort of sensing what the problem was, like in the PCB activity. I mean, it was just obvious that if we didn't start over and make sure everybody was on board with the science, we would have not gotten anywhere. They had that baseball bat meeting I talked about. They had 10 consultants there ready to chew this report out. And so when I threw it on the floor, it sort of deflated them, right? But then there was a starting point, and we could rebuild it from there. So I think just being open with people. I mean, there's so many times, people will say, "Oh, I'm doing a strategic plan, and we're going to have public meetings about it when we're finished the draft final copy." Well, what good is that? You got to bring in the stakeholders to find out what the issues are. So engagement. Wow, very easy.
You've been talking about trust. Is that trust worldwide going to happen? Because I had been a person back in the Burns in the 60s and 70s. There's been an awful lot of social issues that seems to be the problem. It's not the science. The science in many cases is easy. It's the social issues and the trust that's going to be hard. What do you see as a high we live in a time which is pretty tough right now. So I would say, what do you feel about the trustworthy world right now?
is extremely difficult. And you're right, the science seems like it's the easiest step. I was encouraged when I went to the climate change negotiations because there were so many countries on board, way ahead of us. And developed countries as well as developing countries. And, I think people have to understand that we can, I hear some people here, not in this room, but just in the US saying, oh, climate change isn't going to be so bad. If you're more north, you're going to get a longer growing season, and it won't be that bad. But then you see representatives from the Marshall Islands, in their native dress with hip boots on to make the point that they're going underwater now. Or you talk to the African nations that are just going to get drier and drier and drier. You realize that you have to look at it on a global scale and not just what might happen in your own backyard. I was really hoping Sandy would wake up more of the mid-Atlantic and more planning tools were created, but I'm not sure it woke enough people up.
My question follows up a little bit on what you just said. You made the point that there's a lot of uncertainty and that we can't make decisions based on the idea of the period of record. Can you talk a little bit more about the ways you're trying to deal with that uncertainty, tools, predictions, models you might be using?
Excellent question, and that's one of the hardest things I think I was trying to do before I left DRBC was, decision makers, they have to, be responsible to somebody else. There's always somebody else there. And a lot of the solutions could cost a lot of dollars. So, you can't just go to the commissioners and say, hey, 20 years from now, I think we're going to need a reservoir. Or we're going to need another flood control dam. And they're going to say, well, great, show me the models. And you show them the models, and it's, like this. It's really difficult. So, there's the phrase, no regrets. Like, what can we be doing now that at least builds up our resilience somewhat? How can we educate the municipalities? I guess you have the same issue here with local rule. And down by us, it's revenue versus smarts. We will allow people to live in the floodplain as long as their first floor is the 1 foot above the flood line. But is that really right? We're putting them in harm's way from what we know. But then you work with the agencies to redo the flood map, and everybody screams bloody murder because now their house is definitely in the floodplain, and they'll need flood insurance, or they won't be able to sell their house. The values go down. So it is definitely difficult. But I think just putting different scenarios and different levels, that cone of uncertainty type thing, you're not going to be able to go to the worst condition, but maybe you can get them to start something.
I've talked quite a bit about stakeholder engagement, and I wanted to just give the group some insights as to how the controversy of potentially extracting fracked gas in the upper Delaware played out from DRBC's perspective.
Is that a setup question? I want to see my scars. So what happened there, in 2008, the shales had always been there, but with the horizontal drilling and the fracking, the technology now allowed the industry to extract the gas from these shales by cracking them open. And each well needs about 5 million gallons of water that's pushed down under pressure with additives in it to fracture the shales. But then one of the issues is the shales were laid down in ancient oceans, so they're really salty. So when the water comes back up with the gas, especially water that sat on it for a while, comes up like, 300,000 parts per thousand. I mean, it's, really high. Or 300. And so it really is difficult to treat. So there's the amount of water, how you deal with the wastewater. And to me, one of the two things that were sort of got less attention was one, the fragmentation of forests. This is essentially a heavy industry in the most vulnerable part of the basin. So what could be put in place to allow drilling, but make sure that most sensitive areas, riparian forested, headwater forests, were protected was one. And then two, from a planner background, this gas is not going to last forever. And in 30, 60 years, the upper basin will go back to ecotourism. Well, you've got a bunch of Motel 6s instead of the Victorian B&Bs, and you've opened up the stream corridor so it's too warm for trout. Is there going to be a business after the gas drilling? So there are a lot of issues flying around. But the commissioners asked us to put draft comments together. Now I got to get off of here. Draft comments together. Draft regulations. We got 69,000 comments. Nobody was in the middle. Industry and landowners versus the environmental community. It was where you go to meetings and you put scotch tape on your car door to make sure nobody can tamper with it, if anybody tampered with it. And it just pulled the commission apart. Because we had two states with gas, New York and Pennsylvania, two states without gas reserves, so New Jersey and Delaware. So New Jersey and Delaware were only looking at the negatives. They would not get any of the economic value. So it is still a moratorium. The draft regs are sitting on the website. The meeting for the vote was disbanded, I guess 2 days before the meeting was to be held. And still there.
So just to keep things on time, we'll wrap up here, but if you have, Carol's around all day, so please come talk with her during the lunch or afterwards. For coming all this way and giving such a wonderful talk, we have a gift for Carol. And we look forward to many future visits, preferably when we see her aboard her sailboat. So thanks to Carol.